Before Robert Townsend became Hollywood royalty, he maxed out 10 credit cards, edited his movie at an adult film facility, and filmed guerrilla style while dodging police, all to create a satirical masterpiece that would make Eddie Murphy personally request a screening. From improvised hoe-cake monologues to a cinematographer who shot both zombies and David Lynch films, Hollywood Shuffle's behind the scenes story is wilder than its on-screen comedy. Fact 1. Credit card cinema pioneer. Robert Townsend literally put his money where his mouth was when he decided to make Hollywood Shuffle in 1987, charging $40,000 of the film's $100,000 budget directly to 10 personal credit cards. This wasn't just a desperate move by a broke filmmaker, it became a revolutionary financing method that would inspire an entire generation of independent directors who couldn't secure traditional studio backing. The story behind Townsend's credit card strategy reveals just how determined he was to tell his story about the struggles of black actors in Hollywood. After saving $60,000 from various acting jobs, including small roles in films like A Soldier's Story, Townsend found himself running short on funds to complete his directorial debut. Rather than compromise his vision or seek investors who might want to change his script, he took a different approach that seemed crazy at the time. Townsend's mailbox became flooded with pre-approved credit card applications for Visa, MasterCard, Preferred Visa, Preferred MasterCard, and even gas station cards from Chevron and Shell. He saw this as a sign that he could finish his movie using these credit lines, and he systematically applied for and maxed out 10 different cards to fund the production. The process took 2.5 years to complete, partly because he had to wait for new credit card approvals to arrive in the mail before he could continue shooting. This unconventional financing method worked so well that Hollywood Shuffle earned over $5 million at the box office, easily covering Townsend's credit card debt, and proving that independent filmmakers could succeed outside the traditional studio system. His success directly inspired other directors in the 1990s to use similar credit card financing strategies, essentially creating what became known as the credit card cinema movement in independent film. Fact 2. Porno post-house editing. When Robert Townsend needed to edit Hollywood Shuffle, his extremely limited budget forced him to make one of the most unusual choices in mainstream film history. He assembled his satirical comedy at a pornographic film post-production facility. This decision wasn't made for shock value or publicity, but simply because it was the only editing house he could afford during the film's cash-strapped production in the mid-1980s. The situation came about because traditional post-production facilities in Los Angeles were far too expensive for Townsend's shoestring budget, and he had already maxed out his credit cards to fund the actual filming. With his movie shot but unedited, he desperately needed access to professional editing equipment and rooms to piece together his footage into a coherent film. The adult film industry had its own post-production facilities that were significantly cheaper than mainstream Hollywood editing houses, and they were willing to rent time to anyone who could pay. Working in this environment meant that Townsend spent countless hours editing his family-friendly comedy while surrounded by the infrastructure of an entirely different type of filmmaking. The contrast was particularly striking given that Hollywood Shuffle was specifically created to challenge Hollywood's treatment of black actors and promote more dignified roles, while he was literally cutting the film in a facility primarily used for adult entertainment. Despite the unconventional editing location, the quality of Townsend's final product was never compromised, and the film went on to receive critical acclaim and commercial success. The irony wasn't lost on Townsend that he was forced to edit his movie about fighting stereotypes and finding respect in Hollywood at a facility that most mainstream filmmakers would never consider using, highlighting just how challenging it was for independent directors to access professional resources in the 1980s. Fact 3. Mission Impossible filming style. Robert Townsend developed an ingenious but risky scheme to stretch his tiny budget by essentially lying to camera rental companies about when he would actually be using their equipment. His method involved renting professional film equipment on Thursday afternoons while telling the rental house that he planned to shoot on Friday, but then keeping the gear over the entire weekend and returning it first thing Monday morning, effectively getting 3 full days of filming time while only paying for 1 day's rental. This deceptive but clever approach was born out of pure financial necessity, since Townsend's extremely limited funds meant he couldn't afford to rent camera equipment for the actual amount of time he needed to complete his scenes. The standard daily rental rates for professional film cameras, lights, and sound equipment in the mid-1980s were far beyond what his credit card financing could support for extended periods, so he had to find creative ways to maximize every dollar. The scheme required careful timing and coordination with his cast and crew, who had to be ready to work intensively over weekends when most rental houses were closed and wouldn't discover that their equipment was still being used. Townsend had to make sure that everything was returned in perfect condition on Monday mornings to avoid suspicion, and he couldn't afford to have any equipment problems or delays that might expose his extended use of the gear. This weekend filming schedule also meant that Townsend's actors and crew members had to give up their normal time off to work on the movie, adding another layer of complexity to an already challenging production. The rental companies never caught on to Townsend's system during the filming of Hollywood Shuffle, allowing him to complete principal photography using professional equipment that would have otherwise been completely unaffordable for his independent production. Fact 4. Film stock scavenging. Robert Townsend managed to shoot Hollywood Shuffle partly by collecting leftover film stock from other movie productions, specifically gathering unused rolls and short ends from the 1986 films Odd Jobs and Ratboy. This scavenging approach meant that Townsend was literally building his independent comedy from the scraps that bigger-budget Hollywood productions had discarded or couldn't use, turning what would normally be waste into the foundation of his groundbreaking film. The practice of collecting short ends, which are the remaining pieces of film stock left over after larger productions finish shooting, was a common survival tactic among low-budget filmmakers in the 1980s. However, Townsend took this approach to an extreme level out of absolute necessity, since buying new film stock would have been financially impossible given his already maxed-out credit cards and minimal budget of $100,000. Townsend actively pursued these leftover materials by approaching the productions directly and asking for their unused film stock, explaining his situation and requesting whatever they could spare. The cinematographers and producers on these larger films were often willing to help out a struggling independent filmmaker, especially since the alternative was simply throwing the unused film away or storing it indefinitely. This scavenging method required Townsend to work with different types of film stock that might have slightly different characteristics or color qualities, which added another technical challenge to his already complex production process. He had to carefully splice together these various pieces of leftover film and ensure that the differences in stock wouldn't be noticeable in the final edited version of Hollywood Shuffle, demonstrating remarkable resourcefulness and technical skill in making the most of whatever materials he could obtain for free. Fact 5. Eddie Murphy's surprise reaction. Eddie Murphy personally requested a private screening of Hollywood Shuffle after hearing buzz about the film's satirical scene where casting directors demand an Eddie Murphy-type actor, leading to one of the most nerve-wracking moments in Robert Townsend's career. The situation began when Townsend and Keenen Ivory Wayans were on a promotional tour in Europe, and Wayans checked his messages to find a voicemail from Murphy himself, saying he wanted to see this movie everyone was talking about. The screening took place at a 40-seat theater in Burbank, where Murphy arrived with his entire 15-person entourage, including bodyguards and various members of his inner circle. Throughout most of the movie, Murphy and his group were laughing and clearly enjoying Townsend's satirical take on Hollywood's treatment of black actors, but the atmosphere in the room completely changed when they reached the specific scene that directly referenced Murphy by name. During the sequence where the main character has a nightmare about being pressured to become an Eddie Murphy clone, the theater fell completely silent, and Townsend noticed that Wayans actually put his head down in embarrassment. The tension in the room became almost unbearable as Townsend realized they might have crossed a line by directly naming one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, especially since Murphy was sitting right there watching himself being satirized. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, until one of Murphy's bodyguards broke the tension by saying, "Eddie, they said your name? Eddie, they just said your name." At that moment, Murphy burst into his characteristic loud laughter and called out to Townsend and Wayans saying, "Oh man, why y'all do that to me?" Rob Keenen. "Oh, that's messed up." But he was clearly amused rather than offended by the joke. Fact 6. Hoe Cake improvisation legend. John Witherspoon created one of Hollywood Shuffle's most memorable and frequently quoted moments completely by accident when he improvised the entire hoe cake monologue during filming, including the now legendary line, "Hoes gotta eat too." This spontaneous piece of comedy genius wasn't written in the original script and came purely from Witherspoon's natural comedic instincts while playing Mr. Jones, the enthusiastic owner of the Winky Dinky Dog hot dog stand. The scene takes place when Witherspoon's character is trying to motivate his employee Bobby Taylor, played by Robert Townsend, by explaining all the creative menu items he's invented for his restaurant. In the script, Mr. Jones was supposed to list various Winky Dinky Dog products to show Bobby that creativity was possible even in a mundane job, but Witherspoon decided to take the concept much further than anyone expected. While the cameras were rolling, Witherspoon began enthusiastically rattling off menu items like Winky Dinky Dog, Winky Dinky Hamburgers, Winky Dinky Dip, building up momentum and excitement in his delivery. Then, without any prompting from the script or direction from Townsend, he announced his newest creation, "And I got a new one, Bobby! Winky Dinky Hoe Cake!" When Townsend's character naturally responded with confusion, asking, "Hoe cake?" Witherspoon delivered the perfect punchline with complete conviction, "Hoe cake? Ha's gotta eat too!" The improvised moment was so perfectly timed and delivered with such genuine enthusiasm that it immediately became clear this would be one of the film's standout comedic beats. Witherspoon's ability to find humor in the most unexpected places while staying completely in character demonstrated the kind of spontaneous comedy gold that can only happen when talented performers are given the freedom to explore their roles beyond the written material. Fact 7. Evil Dead horror connection. Peter Deming brought an unexpectedly dark and horror-influenced visual style to Hollywood Shuffle, which makes perfect sense when you realize that his only previous cinematography credit was shooting Evil Dead 2, Sam Raimi's cult classic horror comedy that was released just 1 week before Townsend's film in March of 1987. This meant that Deming went directly from filming zombies, gore, and supernatural mayhem to capturing the satirical world of struggling black actors in Hollywood, representing one of the most dramatic genre shifts in any cinematographer's early career. The connection between these two vastly different films happened through Hollywood's network of emerging filmmakers and industry contacts, with executive producer Carl Craig helping to connect Townsend with Deming after putting out feelers to various cinematographers and film school graduates from institutions like the American Film Institute. At the time, Deming was still relatively new to the industry and looking to establish himself as a professional cinematographer, making Hollywood Shuffle an important stepping stone in his developing career. What makes this pairing even more remarkable is how Deming's experience shooting the intense, fast-paced, and visually creative sequences in Evil Dead 2 actually prepared him well for the guerrilla-style filmmaking that Hollywood Shuffle required. Both productions demanded resourcefulness, creativity with limited budgets, and the ability to work quickly under challenging conditions, skills that Deming had just developed while working with Sam Raimi's equally innovative and budget-conscious approach to filmmaking. This early collaboration with Townsend helped establish Deming's reputation as a versatile cinematographer who could work across different genres and production styles, eventually leading to his long-term collaborations with directors like David Lynch on films such as Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway, as well as continued work with Sam Raimi on various projects throughout his career. Fact 8. 2.5-year marathon. Hollywood Shuffle holds the unusual distinction of taking 2.5 years to complete just 17 days of actual filming, creating one of the most drawn-out production schedules in cinema history relative to the amount of footage actually shot. This extended timeline wasn't due to creative difficulties or production problems, but rather because Robert Townsend had to strategically schedule his filming around his stand-up comedy tours, which were his primary source of income during the movie's production. Townsend's approach required incredible patience and organization from his entire cast and crew, who had to remain committed to the project over this lengthy period, while working around everyone's other professional obligations. The filming would happen in short bursts whenever Townsend returned from comedy tours with enough money to fund another few days of shooting, creating a stop-and-start rhythm that was completely unlike typical movie productions where filming happens continuously over a matter of weeks or months. This unconventional schedule meant that actors had to maintain their characters and remember their motivations across gaps that could last several months between shooting days. The continuity challenges were enormous, as hairstyles, weight, and even the actors' natural aging had to be carefully managed to ensure that scenes filmed months apart would still look like they happened in sequence when edited together. The comedy tours that funded each phase of filming took Townsend all across the country, where he would perform stand-up routines and earn approximately $2,000 per week. He would then return to Los Angeles with enough money to rent equipment, pay his skeleton crew, and shoot for a few more days before running out of funds and having to go back on tour again, creating a cycle that continued from October 1984 until August 1986 when principal photography was finally completed. Fact 9. Guerrilla Sunday Morning Strategy. Robert Townsend developed a carefully planned guerrilla filming strategy that involved shooting all of Hollywood Shuffle's outdoor scenes at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sundays, taking advantage of what he described as the one time of week when the world is asleep, people are going to church, or they party too hard. This precise timing was crucial because Townsend knew he couldn't afford the expensive city permits required for legitimate film productions, so he had to find windows of time when his unauthorized filming would go completely unnoticed by authorities and neighbors. The Sunday morning approach worked because police patrols were typically lighter during these early hours, and the streets of Los Angeles were essentially empty, except for the occasional churchgoer or someone recovering from Saturday night activities. Townsend recognized that this narrow time frame gave him the best opportunity to capture professional-looking outdoor footage without drawing attention from law enforcement or curious bystanders who might report the unauthorized film production. To maintain complete secrecy about his filming activities, Townsend implemented strict security measures that included requiring all cast and crew members to park their cars at least 3 blocks away from any shooting location. This precaution ensured that neighbors wouldn't notice an unusual concentration of vehicles or people gathering in their area, which could have led to complaints or police involvement that would shut down the production before any scenes could be completed. The strategy required meticulous advance planning, with Townsend creating detailed shot lists and choreographing every scene to maximize efficiency during these brief Sunday morning windows. Cast members had to arrive in darkness and work quickly to capture all necessary footage before the neighborhood started waking up and the risk of discovery increased, making every minute of these early morning shoots absolutely critical to the film's completion. Fact 10. British director inspiration. The entire concept for Hollywood Shuffle was born from a single humiliating audition experience that Robert Townsend and Keenen Ivory Wayans endured with a condescending British director who was making what Townsend described as an exploitation film about pimps and hustlers. This particular audition became the breaking point that convinced Townsend he needed to create his own movie rather than continue subjecting himself to the demeaning treatment that black actors routinely faced in Hollywood during the 1980s. During this infamous audition, the British director took it upon himself to teach Townsend how to portray a black character speaking in an exaggerated British accent while giving directions like, "You're a bad mofo. You get out of the Cadillac and you pimp slap her." The director's instructions became increasingly offensive and ridiculous, including telling Townsend to stick your butt out and specifically demanding that he make your nostrils flare, as if flaring nostrils were an essential component of authentic black performance. The director's behavior was not only professionally inappropriate but also deeply insulting, as he was essentially instructing a black actor on how to be black, while reinforcing every possible stereotype about African American men. Townsend later recalled how the director's condescending tone included phrases like "pip pip," mixed in with his offensive directions, highlighting the absurd contrast between his British politeness and his racist assumptions about black behavior. Despite feeling humiliated by the experience, Townsend desperately wanted the job and found himself actually attempting to follow the director's ridiculous instructions, flaring his nostrils and exaggerating his movements in ways that felt completely unnatural. After leaving the audition, Townsend told Wayans, "This is bullshit. We gotta make our own movies, man. We're going to die doing this bullshit," which became the direct catalyst for creating Hollywood Shuffle. Fact 11. Refrigerator, moving bartering. Robert Townsend and his crew literally had to work as unpaid movers, hauling refrigerators and other heavy appliances in order to secure the location needed for filming the crucial Jive Time Jimmy's Revenge scenes in Hollywood Shuffle. This unusual bartering arrangement came about because Townsend had no money to pay for professional filming locations, forcing him to get creative about how he could convince property owners to let him use their buildings for his movie production. When Townsend found a location that would work perfectly for the scenes depicting the exploitative blaxploitation film within his movie, he discovered that the property was cluttered with old refrigerators, heaters, and various other discarded appliances that the owner needed removed. Rather than paying cash that he didn't have, Townsend proposed a deal where he and his crew would provide free manual labor to clear out all the unwanted items in exchange for 2 days of filming access to the interior spaces. The arrangement required Townsend and his cast and crew members to temporarily abandon their roles as filmmakers and become a moving company, spending hours carrying heavy appliances and cleaning up trash before they could even begin setting up their cameras and lights. This physical work had to be completed efficiently because Townsend's tight schedule meant that any time spent moving refrigerators was time taken away from actual filming, making every hour of the bartering arrangement a significant sacrifice. The refrigerator moving deal perfectly illustrates the kind of resourcefulness and willingness to do whatever it took that characterized the entire Hollywood Shuffle production, where traditional film industry practices were replaced by creative problem-solving and sheer determination. Townsend later described learning the value of bartering from experiences like this, where his inability to pay cash for services forced him to find alternative ways to get what his production needed. Fact 12. 3. Take limit police dodging. Robert Townsend imposed a strict 3-take maximum on every scene in Hollywood Shuffle because filming any longer in one location would inevitably attract police attention and shut down his unauthorized production. This severe limitation meant that actors had to deliver perfect performances almost immediately, with no room for the multiple attempts that professional film sets typically allow for refining dialogue delivery, blocking, or emotional moments. The 3-take rule created chaotic situations where the film's various fantasy sequences and parody segments had to be shot with military precision and speed. Townsend described how actors would arrive on set prepared to film one type of scene, only to discover that time constraints and the need to avoid detection required immediate costume changes and completely different character portrayals within the same shooting session. The most extreme example of this frantic pace occurred when actors who had prepared to perform as runaway slaves in one of the film's historical parody segments suddenly had to strip off their period costumes and quickly transform into zombie pimps for an entirely different sketch. These rapid character switches happened because Townsend realized he could maximize his limited filming time by shooting multiple unrelated scenes during the same 3-take window, even if it meant asking his performers to completely change their mindset and physical appearance within minutes. This breakneck filming style meant that there was no time for lengthy character preparation, extensive rehearsals, or the kind of gradual performance building that actors typically rely on to develop their roles. Instead, everyone involved had to be ready to jump immediately into whatever character or scene Townsend needed, making the entire production feel like what Townsend himself described as mission impossible, where every moment counted and any delay could result in the entire project being discovered and stopped by authorities. Fact 13. Wayans family pre-fame gathering. Hollywood Shuffle served as an early launching pad for what would become one of comedy's most influential families, featuring both Keenen Ivory Wayans as co-writer and co-star alongside his younger brother Damon Wayans in a smaller supporting role. Years before their groundbreaking sketch comedy show In Living Color would make the Wayans name synonymous with cutting-edge television comedy. At the time of filming in the mid-1980s, neither brother was a household name, and their participation in Townsend's independent film represented some of their earliest significant work in the entertainment industry. Keenen Ivory Wayans played a substantial role both behind and in front of the camera, serving as Townsend's co-writer while also appearing on screen as Donald, one of Bobby's discouraging co-workers at the Winky Dinky Dog restaurant, and later as the character Jerry Curl in the film's noir parody sequence called Death of a Breakdancer. His collaboration with Townsend on the script helped establish the satirical tone and sketch comedy format that would become a signature element of both their careers. Damon Wayans appeared in a much smaller capacity as part of what the film credited as the Hollywood Shuffle Players, a group of actors who appeared in multiple roles throughout the various fantasy sequences and parodies that made up the film's structure. His involvement in Hollywood Shuffle came during the period when he was still developing his comedic voice and building his reputation in Los Angeles comedy clubs. The film essentially captured the Wayans brothers at the beginning of their rise to fame, with In Living Color still 3 years away from its 1990 debut on Fox television. Hollywood Shuffle's success helped both brothers gain industry recognition and connections that would prove crucial when Keenen later pitched his variety show concept to network executives, making the film an important stepping stone in the development of their comedy empire. Fact 14. Post Office Prophesy Ending. Hollywood Shuffle contains a brilliant piece of circular storytelling that most viewers miss on their first viewing, as the film's final scene shows Bobby Taylor filming a public service announcement for the United States Postal Service, directly fulfilling his grandmother's earlier prediction that there's always work at the post office. This subtle narrative callback creates a perfect bookend to Bobby's journey while simultaneously suggesting that his grandmother's practical wisdom was more prophetic than anyone initially realized. Early in the film, Bobby's grandmother, played by Helen Martin, strongly disapproves of his pursuit of acting and repeatedly tells him that if he wants a respectable job with steady income and dignity, he should consider working for the Postal Service. Her advice comes across as the typical older generation concern about choosing security over artistic dreams, and Bobby dismisses her suggestions as overly cautious thinking that doesn't understand his creative ambitions. The grandmother's Postal Service recommendation becomes a recurring theme throughout the movie, representing the tension between following one's dreams and accepting practical reality. Her character serves as the voice of conventional wisdom, warning Bobby about the harsh realities of trying to make it as a black actor in Hollywood, while consistently pointing toward what she sees as a more reliable and dignified career path. The film's closing scene reveals the deeper meaning behind this advice when Bobby is shown on a professional film set, but instead of filming the exploitative Jive Time Jimmy's Revenge or any other stereotypical role, he's shooting a commercial for the Postal Service. This ending suggests that Bobby found a way to use his acting skills in a context that would make his grandmother proud, working in association with the very institution she had recommended, while still pursuing his passion for performance, creating a resolution that honors both his dreams and her wisdom. Fact 15. Character name stereotyping system. Robert Townsend discovered that Hollywood casting directors in the 1980s had developed a disturbing but systematic method of signaling racial stereotypes through character names, revealing that black actors could immediately identify what type of demeaning role they were being asked to audition for simply by reading the character's name on the casting sheet. Townsend explained that when he received audition materials, you always knew who your character was when they sent you the sides, because the names were deliberately chosen to indicate specific racial caricatures. The character names that Townsend and other black actors regularly encountered included obviously stereotypical choices like 8-Ball, Boot, Midnight, and Licorice, each name designed to immediately communicate to both the actor and the production team what kind of one-dimensional character was being cast. These names weren't accidental or coincidental, but rather represented a coded language within the industry that reduced black characters to their most basic and offensive stereotypes before the actors even had a chance to audition or demonstrate their actual abilities. This naming system served as a form of institutional racism that allowed casting directors and producers to maintain plausible deniability about their intentions while still clearly communicating their expectations for how black characters should be portrayed. The practice was so widespread and accepted within Hollywood that it had become a normal part of the audition process, with actors expected to understand and conform to these stereotypical expectations based solely on seeing names like these on their character descriptions. Townsend's decision to expose this practice in Hollywood Shuffle represented one of the first times that the entertainment industry's systematic use of coded language to perpetuate racial stereotypes was directly addressed and satirized in a mainstream film, helping audiences understand how deeply embedded these discriminatory practices were within Hollywood's supposedly professional casting process.